Order. The question is that the motion be agreed to, and I call the member for Lyne.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. 18 months on from the devastating bushfires, a wet Armageddon arrived into the houses, literally, of thousands of people in the Lyne electorate. The amount of flooding is of a staggering proportion. It was more than a 1 in 100-year flood. It was the biggest flood on record. And records go back in some families who've been in these river valleys for 5 generations into the 1880s. As the low-pressure system dwelled across the mid-north coast, we saw towns and villages cut off, roads and bridges, even houses washed away, some of whom you may have seen floating down the Manning River on mainstream TV. But there were houses on the Papenburra River that were washed away, and the Hastings, and it was absolutely devastating. Living on the Hastings River myself, I was isolated on a farm, fortunately about 20 metres above the floodwaters, but we couldn't get out for a couple of days at least. Once the waters receded, the devastation was mind-boggling. Evacuation centres in Laurelton and Taree at various clubs that popped up as emergency centres had hundreds of people in them. People whose houses on wheels in caravan parks and their low-lying houses were absolutely devastated. But many clubs and evacuation centres turned into medical centres, mental health centres, roof and shelter, food, and as well we had all the support groups coming through, both people working in those clubs and volunteer centres as well as community groups and sets of individuals who gathered together to rescue people. I would like to acknowledge all of them and thank them for what they did spontaneously. But in particular, I'd like to thank the councils, their staff and management who worked across all the regions in the Port Macquarie, Hastings and Mid Coast councils. I'd also like to thank the SES and the RFS and groups like the Surf Life Saving Clubs who, in their rubber duckies, were out rescuing people 2 farms across from me. It was absolutely staggering, the amount of help that came in after the floods. We had people coming down from Coffs Harbour because there were so many people at risk all at once that all our formal volunteer groups couldn't cope with them all. There were 3,055 homes in the Hastings Valley that were flooded, and 1,231 were seriously damaged by those devastating floods. In the community of North Haven, for instance, on the Camden Haven River, there were street after street inundated with water, and I'd like to particularly thank Mayor Peter Pinson and her husband Craig, who were able to mobilise a number of trucks and bobcats from their own business and other businesses to help start the clean-up. I'd also like to thank the Governor-General and the Prime Minister for visiting my electorate to see firsthand the devastation and mobilise whatever Commonwealth support could be provided. There's been much support from our government that's been able to provide in both the emergency response and the ongoing clean-up, and I think the federal and state and local government agencies are getting better at doing this together. In the Camden Haven as well, there were a particular group of young men who, because the SES were overwhelmed and the Surf Life Saving people were deployed elsewhere, they just got in their own tinnies and rescued about 5 elderly people. I wasn't there, obviously, and I was stranded up on the Hastings River, but these young gentlemen deserve a medal. They just showed great initiative and foresight and got on and did it themselves. The ministers involved in emergency services, for all the admin and people that they mobilised to come into our area to help, was greatly appreciated. It really was Armageddon for many dairy farmers on the Manning and the Hastings and in the Papenburra River and the Wilson River and, as I said, the Camden Haven River. You know, floods by their very nature are on some of the most fertile land, and some of the farms that have been devastated by this will take a couple of years at least to recover both their crops that feed the animals and to get their dairy herds back into milk production will be a big effort. So our thoughts go out to them, our support continues, and thanks for everyone who helped.